Hello, hello. So happy to be here, Flavio here. Today's question comes from John and it says, how does hypnosis connect us to higher dimensions? Doesn't hypnotherapy only give us access to the unconscious so we can become conscious of what is unconscious? Or are you saying that accessing the unconscious is also accessing a higher dimension? How does this even work? First of all, John, thank you so much for the question. I do believe you are correct. I mean, what you're asking here does correspond to the way that I would define and explain these things. We sometimes, in the field, we sometimes differentiate a little bit between the idea of hypnotherapy and the phenomenon of hypnosis. I do think that they're a little different. Hypnosis or hypnotherapy is therapy, conventional therapy, and by definition, in therapy, you're always seeking to make the unconscious conscious so that we can solve problems and improve the quality of our lives. Any therapy, I think you would agree, we can all agree that in any therapy, that is the goal. In other words, if I do something that I cannot stop doing, or if I cannot do something that I want to do, there's always some unconscious component there that I want to overcome. So by becoming conscious of the unconscious, by changing my mind about myself, I can actually either do something that I couldn't do before or not do something that I couldn't stop doing before. And I think that's the goal of any therapy. Now, how many different ways are there to get there? And as many as there are types of therapy. And in the original psychoanalysis, you dealt with the unconscious, Jung, and basically in all forms of therapy, there's an aspect of becoming conscious of the unconscious. I would definitely, absolutely agree with you, John, and everyone else listening, that is a big part of therapy. Now, one way to do therapy is to use hypnosis. And that's where the term hypnotherapy comes from. We use hypnosis to do therapy. In other words, we use hypnosis to become conscious of the unconscious. But clearly, it's not the only way to do it, because if we talk about this problem long enough, we're probably going to be able to solve it as well. In which case, there is really no hypnosis. So anyway, hypnotherapy is therapy where the primary ingredient is hypnosis. And then the question is, what is hypnosis? Hypnosis is an altered state of consciousness that gives us access to different portions of the mind, if you will. Now, I do want to say this, that up until, I think, the mid to late 90s, 1990s, so about 30 years ago or so, I can give you references later, hypnosis was thought of as a mysterious idea that, for some researchers, was something made up. There is no hypnosis. The client cooperates with the hypnotist, but there really is no hypnosis. And then in 1981, a tool called magnetic resonance imaging became available, MRI, which they use all the time in medicine, and a little later something called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI. And in functional MRI, you can actually see the distribution of blood flowing to the brain. Nowadays, we have other tools to do that. There are different ways of doing that now. SPECT imaging, fMRI imaging, there are different ways packed. There are different ways of determining where the blood is going into the brain, depending on the time resolution that you need and the spatial resolution that you need, and the different tools that you have available in a particular laboratory. But bottom line is that since the mid to late 90s, we now know scientifically that the brain state associated with hypnosis is different from everything else that we thought was hypnosis. In other words, hypnosis is not imagination. Hypnosis is not cooperation. Hypnosis is none of that. Hypnosis is a state different from everything else at the brain level. So today we know that hypnosis is real scientifically. There are a ton of papers published. There are Stanford professors who research hypnosis. And I just want to say this because every now and then you're going to find somebody who says, well, hypnosis is just, you're just imagining, it doesn't really work, it doesn't really exist. And it's okay if the person is not an expert in the field, they wouldn't be aware of this necessarily. But simply they're speaking from a lack of awareness, a lack of knowledge on the subject. I mean, today we do know scientifically, from a brain perspective, from a neuroscience perspective, that hypnosis is in fact a real state. And I can record another video talking about this later, with the actual studies that they have done and so forth. That's a different topic, and certainly one that we can explore. But having said that, if hypnosis is a brain state, and it's possible to have various levels of hypnosis, right? So in the mystical tradition, we tend to divide things into 4 groups. And I'll give you, you're going to see now in the picture, there's a number of different ways that we can look at this, in which we divide things into 4 levels. And whatever, we can disagree on this. You might, this is purely dependent upon one particular school of thought, particularly Kabbalah, where we talk about the 4 different realms, right? And so for people who like Kabbalah and they talk about 4 different realms, they tend to see the world in terms of groupings of 4 different levels of things, because they kind of correspond to what these early Kabbalists realized many, many, many years ago. So I'll give you an example. If you look at the images, if you talk about a conventional slide projector, when I was a kid, we used to have slide projectors. You would have a light bulb, a slide, a lens, and the image on the screen. 4 things: light, slide, lens, and image. The collection of those 4 things allows you to see the picture, right? So the picture that you see, the image that you see, it came from the light, it went through the slide, which gave it form, created the image. The lens gave it form, The slide creates the image, the lens gives it form, and then the image is cast on the screen, and I can watch and enjoy the picture of the family on vacation, whatever the case is. When you talk about Aristotle, I just want to show you a number of different things that can be classified in groups of 4. Aristotle, I'm changing the subject. Aristotle, a philosopher that lived about 2,300 years before the Common Era, the Christian era, he talked about causation. How do I know that A causes B? How do I know that one thing causes another? And he says, look, it's not such a simple question. Whenever you talk about causation, you got to talk about the 4 levels of causation. There are 4 levels of cause. And the example that he gives is, if you look at a marble statue and you ask yourself, what is the cause of this statue? You would say, well, the material, right? Without the marble, you wouldn't have the statue. Then you have the efficient cause, which is somebody had to chip the marble away to make the statue. Then you have the formal cause, which is the form of the statue, the figure that you want to create. And then you have the final cause, which is the purpose for which we built the statue. When you look at a social context, most people would agree that societies are formed on the basis of families. And a family is the outcome, is the final product of the nucleus of the cell. And if you start from the top, you would have the father, the mother, right? The seed flows from the father to the mother. The mother produces the child or children, and then the collection of all of them creates the result, which is the family. If you look at anatomy, on the top you would have the head, then the thorax, the center of life, right? You would have the lungs and heart, and then the abdomen, where energy is created, the organs of digestion and all. And then you have the limbs extending from from each of the previous 3. When you look at the body or our lives or us as an entity, you have some type of soul, some type of mind, and then we have this energetic body and the chemical body. So you might say, what do you mean a chemical body? Well, the meat and bones that we're talking about, they're made out of electrons and chemicals. But that in of itself does nothing if it were not for the vital body or the energetic body or the etheric body, which animates the chemical body, the physical body, sometimes also known as the dense body. So the dense body, if you look at a person who just died 1 minute ago, they look normal. They look exactly like the other guy who's alive. If they're both, one is dead 1 minute later and one is asleep, they both look the same. The difference between the two is that one body is animated, it's alive, and the other isn't. This energy that animates is what we call the vital body, the energetic body, or the etheric body. Okay, look at education. You know, you would have natal education or pre-elementary education. That is what you learn at home before you go to school. You have your primary education, secondary education, and then post-secondary education. And of course, this can be further subdivided and so forth. Look at sleep, starting from the bottom. You could be awake, you could be in light sleep, you could be in REM sleep. That's when dreaming and memory consolidation occurs, or you can be in deep sleep. That corresponds to brain waves. You know, when you put little electrodes on the scalp of a person, you can actually measure electrical activity in the brain, all of that stuff. You know, you can have 28 channels, 32 channels, little probes on the scalp. You can run all of that through filters, and you can determine what the fundamental frequency, the frequency of the electrical activity in the brain is. And there could be foci, there could be different regions in the brain with electrical activity in different frequencies, but you can determine a global activity of the brain, and they would be classified as beta, alpha, theta, or delta. Theta would be somewhere above 14 hertz or so. Alpha is when you're relaxed. Theta is when you're kind of in a trance state. In delta, you're basically, you know, between 1 and 4 hertz or 1 and 4 cycles per second. You're basically gone to the world. It corresponds to deep sleep. So then when you look at the mind, we talk about the objective mind, the subjective mind, the subconscious, and then the supraconscious. Again, 4 levels. If you look at the realms in the world, right, you have the physical world, the astral world, the cosmic world, and the divine world. Now, Kabbalah puts this in a very interesting way. It says that there are 4 realms or 4 worlds. Starting from the top, you have the world of emanation, where the light emanates from. If you notice, this would correspond to the light in the projector. And then you have creation. That light that emanates is undifferentiated. Look at the analogy with the slide projector. In order for that undifferentiated light to take form, it has to be created. Something has to be created there. That's the slide. Manifestation, it has to be given form or formation or manifestation. That's the lens that kind of shapes it. And then the world of action or the physical world. And of course, in hypnosis, you would have something called room awareness. That's when you and I are talking. You have the hypnoidal state, which is like a light hypnosis. You know, just close your eyes, listen to my voice. You already are in the hypnoidal state. Then you have your deep trance. And then you have this thing called ultra depth or ultra high, different names that people use. And that's the much deeper states of hypnosis. What I want to take a look at is when you look at this picture, there are 2 things going on. You have a vertical axis running through each one of these columns. And these are different degrees of vibration or levels or realms or worlds, if you will. And then you have a line running across the rows, right? And then when you look across in Hermetic philosophy, we talk about the principle of correspondence. So you take a look at any one row, and one idea corresponds to the other across the row. And then the law of vibration in Hermetic philosophy refers to the vertical axis. In other words, different degrees of vibration vertically in each one of the columns. But then when you look across the columns into one row, each one of those ideas correspond. So for instance, when you look at sleep, and at the bottom you have awake, and then the brain waves correspond to beta. Well, when you're awake talking, you're primarily in beta operation in your brain, and that corresponds to your objective mind. You're functioning very much aware of the physical world, which is the world of action, the physical world in Kabbalah, which in the hypnotic idea, you are in room awareness, you are in the awake state, right? So next, I want to, what I did is I took a few of those columns from the previous picture and I redrew them here. They're the same ones that we just looked at before, except that this time I simply colored the top row in yellow to show you something. There's something really interesting about the light from the projector, the soul, deep sleep, delta brain waves, the supraconscious, the divine realm, the world of emanation in Kabbalah, and ultra depth or ultra high hypnosis. And this goes to the question that was asked. If you look at the difference between this yellow row and the other rows, there's something quite distinct about the previous three from the upper row in yellow. And that is that one is personal, the bottom is personal, and the top is not personal, it is collective. Look at the light from the projector. It emanates 360 degrees in all directions, undifferentiated light. The moment you run that light through a slide, it takes on a form. It's an image, something is created there. The light is no longer undifferentiated light. We could also put here cellular development in biology, in medicine, right? When you have a stem cell, a pluripotent cell, a cell that can become anything, the cell eventually differentiates genetically and becomes committed. Now the cell is going to be muscle or nerve. It's going to take on a particular shape. It's no longer pluripotent. It's no longer undifferentiated. It became differentiated. The undifferentiated is collective. It's not personal. So the soul is undifferentiated. In deep sleep, you're not you. In delta, you're not you. Supraconscious, by definition, is collective. Carl Gustav Jung called the supraconscious the collective unconscious as opposed to the personal unconscious. The divine realm, emanation, ultra depth. When you are in that level of hypnosis, you're not a personal individual. You become a part of it all. So when you look at this other picture over here, where I single out hypnosis, except that I added 2 rows to make a point here, when you start in room awareness at the bottom, you go to a hypnotist and you start the process in room awareness, you relax a little bit. You go into the hypnoidal state, which corresponds to the alpha brain waves, and there is a barrier there. We call this, hypnotists typically call this the critical faculty, or a little bit of a barrier. You have to do something that we call an induction. We have to use some exercises for your awareness to shift from the hypnoidal state to deep trance. That is what, in deep trance is where therapy occurs. Because here I'm looking at my unconscious files, the stuff about myself that I'm not aware of, and this is where I can make changes within my person. But these files here in deep trance, the files that I have access to, are personal. What happened to me in childhood, my past lives, who am I, why do I do this, why don't I do that? Deep trance. But then there's another barrier there that's a bit trickier to cross, and some people don't even know that this exists because they don't get there. And it's almost as if we have to do another induction, if you will. It's like a whole new level of depth. And that's when you go into this ultra level, which corresponds then to this impersonal or collective realm. So going back to the question, how does hypnosis connect us to higher dimensions? Well, if you keep on pushing the hypnotic process beyond the personal unconscious, you go into a collective unconscious, and those are the higher dimensions that correspond to the cosmic world. This is where you transcend your person. Doesn't hypnotherapy only give us access to the unconscious so we can become conscious of what is unconscious? That is the definition that we use in hypnotherapy, because in therapy we're only concerned with our own personal problems, if you will, right? So we focus on the deep trance state where we can make personal changes, yes. But no, hypnosis is a launching point for the higher dimensions, which are the impersonal or the collective dimensions. So, and typically we don't do that in conventional therapy. People don't come over. In other words, this is beyond the concept of therapy. Are you saying that accessing the unconscious is also accessing a higher dimension? Well, accessing the unconscious or in deep trance, we certainly have a launching point, a trampoline from which we can reach higher dimensions. And by higher dimensions, what I mean here in this context is this collective or this impersonal. In other words, when the idea of the I, the individual I, dissolves. So if I pull out a drop of water from the ocean, I put that drop of water on a laboratory, on a microscope slide, and I look at the water, and there might be microorganisms there, little crystals of salt, whatever. That's a little drop of water. That's a unique drop of water. It's not like other drops of water. But the moment I take the drop of water and I throw it back into the ocean, there's no way to retrieve it. That drop of water dissolved into the ocean and it became a part of the ocean. Okay, maybe the analogy is useful, maybe it's not, but the individual can be dissolved. The idea of the I does dissolve in this thing that we call higher dimensions. Typically, that's not what we do in the therapeutic context, but that is certainly one use of hypnosis. In other words, getting to hypnosis as a trampoline, as a launching point to get into the higher dimensions in which you cease to be the I, the individual. I hope that helps. Keep on sending your questions, all of you, and I will record further videos explaining as best as I can. And, the quality of these explanations will improve as we go forward, as we learn together. And I'm also looking forward to your explanations. Please let me know how you're feeling about this and what you're thinking and what's important to you so that we can make this conversation even more useful to all of us. Thank you so much. Blessings to all. Talk soon.